Hello there, it's nice to meet you. In this video, I want to share my thoughts on light and shadow linking, which was introduced in Blender 4.0 quite a while now. So, as an overview of this video, I will explain what is light and shadow linking, how to use it in Blender. Then I will share some tips with some examples, and I will conclude it with the breakdown of this animation. So I hope you will learn something new. And without wasting more time, let's begin with light linking. If I explain it in simple way, then let's say you want a red light to affect only the cylinder, then here you can hide that with light linking. And if I hide the cylinder, then it's like this red light here doesn't exist in a scene because this light is set to affect only the cylinder. Same as this yellow light. And if you're wondering that this light also lets this plane and cube, even if it's not as intense, well, that's because of the bounce light from these two objects. Just remember, light and shadow linking only works in cycles and it does not work in EV. So, to summarize it, in light linking, you can tell a light source to affect only specific objects. And by light source, I mean these lights and emitted objects. And by using only light linking, you can have this much complex scenes. I mean, if you can call it complex though, in which this blue light affects all these objects. Red light here affects only this cylinder, and this yellow light here only affects these two objects. Now that's done, let's explain the shadow linking. In shadow linking, you can specify which objects would cast shadow and which won't by a specific light source. Like in this case here, this cylinder does not cast shadow from this blue light. And if I turn on the red light, then rules are reversed, in which only this cylinder casts shadow from this red light. Ignore this case here, I will explain it later. Just to clarify it, let's add a new light. And this light here does not use any light or shadow linking. If I turn on all three lights, then you can see the cylinder casts only two shadows instead of three. One from this red light and one is from this new light. Okay, now if you have a question like in which scenario I will use light or shadow linking, now that's a good question though. For that, let me tell you. In this animation, you see those lights under each object. Light and shadow linking plays a big role to make it happen. I mean, you can achieve it by other means too, but I do find it much easier in that way. And that's just a beginning because you can have a lot more combinations for more complex scenes. Now that's done, let's explain the implementation in Blender. To implement light linking, first you have to select the light source, which is this light, then go to Object Properties, Light Linking, and then click on New. Then it creates a new ID data. For now, ignore it and keep the focus on this gray box. In this gray box, whatever object you drag in, let's say this sphere, then it comes as checked by default. And what that means is, now this light here affects only this sphere. I can drag other objects like this too. I can also uncheck them, so light would affect every other object except them. Okay, now let's make this interesting by adding a new light. Follow the same steps as we did before, and after clicking on new, it creates a new ID data for this light. I can drag objects into it and it works like blue light. But what if you have 10 or even more objects that you want inside this box? For that, there is a shortcut in which first select all the objects that you want inside this box and select the light source at the end. Then press Ctrl plus L, link receivers to emitters, and include. After that, all the objects will appear in it as checked. But what if you want all the objects to be affected except this cube? For that, select this cube and then light source, then press Ctrl plus L and then exclude. Then this cube appears as unchecked. And now you can see this light now does not affect this object. Now that's done, then let's go to the shadow linking by going under one step and clicking on new. The process is same. You drag the objects into this gray box, but this time only checked objects would cast shadow by that specific light source. If I uncheck it, then except this cube, every other object casts shadow by this blue light. The shortcut of implementing shadow linking is same as light linking. You select both objects and light source at the end. Then press Ctrl plus L, but this time link blockers to emitters and include. Now these two objects appeared as checked. Let's make this interesting by adding a new line and then select these two objects with this line at the end. Then press Ctrl plus L and this time exclude. Now except these two, every other object casts shadow from this red light. Let's turn on the blue light. Now you can clearly see only sphere casts shadow from red light and other two objects cast shadow from blue light. If I check Suzanne while red light is selected, then only Suzanne casts shadow from both red light and blue light. Here it's much clearer now, with red light turned on and with only blue light on. Okay, now that's done. Now I want to clarify one thing, which is there can be three situations in this gray box as per stated by the Blender manual. The first situation is all the objects in this gray box are checked. Second is some objects are checked and some are unchecked. And third is all the objects are unchecked. In simple terms, you just have to focus on two situations. The first situation is if any object is checked, then in light linking case, light source would affect only that object. And in shadow linking case, only that object would cast shadow. And the second situation is if all the objects are unchecked, then in light linking, that light source would only ignore those objects. And in case of shadow linking, only those objects won't cast shadow. Now let's focus on this example. So far it looks simple, right? I mean, it's a normal case after all. Let's add this pair in shadow linking area. So only this pair can cast shadow. Now look what happened there. Its shadow gets cast on every other object in its path. It looks weird, right? Before I explain this situation, I want to clarify one thing, that the explanation you're about to hear is just pure my observation. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, now what is happening there? Let's jump back to normal case. In normal case, you can think it's like every object casts shadow on every other object in its path. Like this pair casts shadow on these two cubes and these two planes. This cube casts shadow on this cube and these two planes, and so on. But you can't see it because other object shadows hide its shadow. Let's say I hide this cube shadow, then you can see this pair shadow on this other cube too. I mean, there is a reason it's called link blockers to emitters, and by excluding it for this light, we tell this light to ignore it, just the shadow part. I mean, that makes sense, right? In simple way, we hide this cube for this light only, just the shadow part, but it will still be visible in the scene. As an example, you can see this rim light here. This light affects this object straight through the plane. Like this plane doesn't exist for this light only. And if you think this plane is still lit somewhere, that's because of the bounce light from this object. I will break down this scene later. And about this part, I think you would have guessed what is happening there. The purpose of this example is just to show you the possibilities you can have by only using shadow linking. And by combining light and shadow linking, you can create really complex scenes. Now that's done, let's jump to the collections. In light and shadow linking, you can drag the whole collection from outliner to here. By that, you tell the light source to affect all the objects inside this collection. And here is an interesting part. You can drag an object from the same collection to here and uncheck it. By that, light source will affect every object inside this collection except that object. It is actually really helpful if we have a ton of objects inside a collection. Now earlier in this video, I said when you click on new, it creates a new ID data. The purpose of this ID data is you can use it on multiple light sources. Let's rename it first and drag an object so we can see the change. Now this light linking ID, we can use it on other lights too. Like this red light, if I click on here, then this list shows the other ID data that is used on other lights and collections from outliner, which I will explain in a minute. But first, let's select ignore plane ID. Now you can see both lights share the same ID data. If I drag this cube, then it reflects on both lights. The best part is you don't have to drag the object. Instead, just select the object, then light source. Press Ctrl plus L, and now you can see it's same as before. The reusing of ID data is really helpful if you have multiple lights and you want all the lights to behave in same way. Just remember, this ID data can also be used on light and shadow linking interchangeably. So I can use this ignore plane ID on here too. It will affect the light source in a different way. Now let's talk about the collections from this list. First, let's select a collection which is same as this. Now you can see it shows all the objects from that collection. You can uncheck and check them. It works normally. But I want you to be aware of one thing, which is important one. That if I remove an object from there, then look at the outliner. That object gets deleted. If I search it, I can't find it because it gets deleted completely. So be aware because you can delete an object accidentally if you is using a collection like this. Now let's spice things up by adding a queue. Right now it's unlit because it's outside the collection. Makes sense. But if I drag it from outliner to here, then it's lit. And if you look at the outliner, then this object exists on both places. Well, why is that? As far as my knowledge goes, I think Blender created a linked object. Like if I select one object, other one also gets highlighted. And if I hide either of them, the other one also gets hidden. Now here is an interesting part. If I remove that object from here, then it gets deleted from the collection. But the object that gets deleted is the linked object, and the original object is still here, which is now unlit. And if I undo it and delete the cube from outliner, then both gets deleted. So when to use it? Well, if you ask my advice, then I prefer to keep things simple and not use collection like this. I mean, there can be certain situations though where it might be helpful, but it's up to you that you want to use it like this or not. Now the final topic, the emitted objects. The way you use the light and shadow linking with emitted objects is same as any light source. I just want you to be aware of one thing that occurred to me, which is if I emit an object by going to material properties, clicking on new, then increasing the strength of emission. Then if I add these two objects as included in light linking, so far no problem, right? The problem occurs when I add an object in shadow linking area. And now I had to restart the Blender. So the reason why this problem occurs is this principal BSDF shader. Just don't emit an object by using principal BSDF if you're planning of using the shadow linking. Instead use emission shader. And now if I add an object, then it works flawlessly. Now the explanation parts are done, so let's explore an example. In this example, I try to recreate Yuffie's weapon Steel Ripper from Final Fantasy VII Remake as a practice. In Blender, if you look at it, it's a mess of lights. But for now, let's focus on this center light. This light's purpose is to lit only the plane from a specific angle. If you look at here, you can see it lights only the background and ignore the weapon. If I remove the light linking, then it looks like this. In shadow linking, weapon is unchecked, so it does not cast any shadow on the plane from this light. Like if I remove weapon shadow ID from this light, then you can see this shadow appears from this blade. Also this number here, it implies how many lights are using this ID. As this light also uses the same shadow linking ID. If I remove it, then you can see the shadow on plane. It's hard to notice, but if you look at there, then you can see it slightly. Now let's move our focus on this back particles light, which shines through these particles from this plate. If you look at here, then it only lights the background to prevent the accidental rim light on the weapon. If you are curious how it works, then first let's go to the shading tab. This part here I won't go into detail how it works because this video is not about that. But this part creates these particles and it goes straight into transmission. So light can pass through it to create this type of effect. If I turn on the weapon lights, then you can see all of these lights share the same ID data for light linking, which is reused by 18 times. Now this rim light here, which also removes the background shadow, which I already talked about it. If I remove it, then this scene gets completely black. And with that, it concludes this example. So now let's focus on the final part and break down the intro animation, which is actually quite simple if you think about it. So here in this scene, there are a bunch of lights with a domain. Let's hide these lights and focus on this light first. As you can see, it only affects these objects. By the way, this bolt here, to create it, I use the bolt factory add-on, which is inbuilt in Blender. Okay, now from this light, only bolt casts shadow. If you're thinking that why this area light acts like a spotlight, well, to do that, I just decrease the spread amount. Also, you can use spotlight if you want to, because it gives more control. This blue light here affects all the objects inside this collection, which are all of the objects you can see, and it ignores their shadows. This red light here only affects you and remove all the shadows from this collection. These two lights affects only Suzanne, and there are these lights which are under the plane. These lights are specific for each object and they only affect that object. Also, they all remove the plane shadow so they can let these objects through it. And just to quickly adjust their position, I painted those lights to their corresponding objects, so I can move them around freely. And there is a domain which is used to create the environment for this scene. If I go to sharing tab, then this domain is just these two nodes only. About that domain, something is weird, right? Like if you have used domain before, you would know lights does not work like this when they are inside a domain. To explain it, let's focus on this light first. You can see this pole direct light does not affect the domain. Actually, neither of those lights affect it. So if I remove it, then this light affects every object like it normally would. And it looks like this. I can add the domain here like this to have the same effect. Same with this blue light. Here what this scene looks like if I hide the domain. It feels a bit washed out, isn't it? In the end, it's a nice thing to have because you can still get the effect by using a domain and not getting the light like this. I mean, this whole thing is situational because sometimes you want light to look like this. This animation part, which is actually pretty simple. Here, I animated the each light's power from 0 to a certain amount. Like here, you can see this red light starts from there to there. Same with other lights. It's a little messy though because I just edit them quickly and we don't need this graph editor. I just put it there because this whole scene looks cool like I'm doing something complicated. So this is it, and with that we concluded with this video. I hope this video would be helpful to you, and if I made some mistakes then feel free to correct me. Also, you can tell me about the pacing of this video because I think I made it too serious, but we gotta start somewhere though, isn't it? And for the audio, I know it's not great. I will improve it. So, in the end, have a good day, and if it's night there, then have a good night. See ya.